for listening to Ding Dong Darkness Time Season 2 Stephen King Boogaloo. I gathered several of my most well-read friends together to discuss many of our favorite works by the master of the macabre himself. If you like what you hear, tell the world. In the meantime, let's talk some scary stories. Oh, and beware the spoilers, folks. They're a doozy. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Ding Dong Darkness Time. I'm Allison Dickson, and this is a very special episode because of who I have with me today. Both of these guys are more or less directly responsible for me sitting here blabbing into this microphone in the first place. One of them you should know pretty well already. My bestie, my brother from the cosmos, King Ding Dong himself from the halls of 80s High, Chris Armstrong. Come on in, man. Bring it in.
What's up, everyone? Hey, budge over. I'm going to sit on a couch with you.
Get in here. This is going to be a nice group discussion.
Absolutely.
Okay. There's so much I'm going to have to...
She's verklempt. Talk amongst yourselves.
Okay. And now, our other guest is someone I might not have come to know at all if not for Chris. And we talked about that a little in episode 1, but Chris introduced me to a certain podcast, and we both have fangirled over it here a few times, and we do that a lot in private as well. And in the time I became enamored with that show, I've since made the acquaintance with one of the hosts, and by some absolute miracle I'll never understand, I convinced him to join us on my tiny remote island to talk to us about Stephen King and whatever else comes to mind. And I'm speaking, of course, about Brett from the Prosecutors. I need to bring in like a soundboard with like raving audience people.
There you go.
Yeah. You're right. I should borrow some of your music. Brett, you're here. We've been talking. I can't believe you're here. Just why are you here, Brett?
Well, because I'm a fan of awesome podcasts. I like to take part in them. I am so happy and honored to be here. And I just got to tell you, this is the most nervous I've been since we recorded our first episode. So, if I'm a little shaky, just know it's because, it's big game time. Big game time.
Brett, this blows me away that when Allison told me this, she's like, Brett's nervous. I was like, how? He's a prosecutor. Like, he has this amazing podcast. I guess you're never above getting the jitters sometimes, I guess, right?
It's true. And, horror is my true love. And I feel like we're talking about my true love today. And you guys are the experts in darkness, ding dong darkness. So I feel like I got a lot to live up to.
You really don't. I mean, I remember before we really started talking a lot, I, see your posts on Twitter and noticed that you were really into horror movies. I, immediately kind of glommed onto that and was like, all right, cool. Like we have something in common there. But then as I got to know you more, learned that, you are into paranormal and you're into cosmic horror and you've done some writing. And so you've been immersed in it. So I guess I just want to know, how long have you been into it? Did this come to you at childhood? Have you always been into scary stuff?
I do. I remember exactly what shaped me and what made me the lover of horror that I am. I don't know. Am I the oldest person here? I guess I am.
No,
right?
You're not. No.
I think you're the youngest person.
Am I the youngest person here? Okay, whatever. Well, we all remember the 80s.
Yes.
We all remember the 80s. Remember the 80s well.
Yes.
And
oh, yeah.
We had in my family, I don't even know exactly how to describe it. It was like a video disc player. It was like a proto VCR or whatever. Anyway, so my parents bought me the disc for the Thriller video.
Oh.
And I must have watched that video 1,000 times. I would just watch it over and over. And if I'd had YouTube back then, I would have just watched it over and over and over again on YouTube. And I really feel like, and we had the record too, the Thriller record, and I would listen to it on the record when I couldn't watch it on the video disc player. And I feel like that was, from that point on, I was always going to love horror. And it's just been sort of one step after another from that point.
I've always wondered, I found myself as I was typing up show notes today, I don't know that anybody comes late into this genre, do they? I feel like it's something that trips a switch in your brain as a child. Like you were traumatized by something as a kid and you just attached to it and embraced it somehow. I mean, Chris, was that kind of your experience too?
I feel like I always liked horror movies. One of the earlier ones, I mean, I love thriller. It was always like an event. When we knew it was
Yeah.
coming on MTV, we got to stay up a little bit late and watch it. Like I was probably like 4 or 5 or something at that time, and then just kept watching it. But the other big movie, which we keep talking about, and I think we just need to like put it on your show at some point, Allison, is Maximum Overdrive.
Yes. Yes.
I
We do.
loved that Coke-fueled Stephen King directed movie. So ridiculous, but I loved it so much as a kid. We saw it in the theater with my brother and my mom, and it was the best.
Oh, wow. You saw it in the theater.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I know, right?
I don't think I saw it in the theater. I saw it on VHS back in around the same summer. I remember staying with my aunt in South Carolina. I have a lot of family in the South, and we would stay summers in Charleston. And my one aunt, she always had the same movies on replay. And that particular summer was defined by Maximum Overdrive, The Stuff. Does anybody remember
Oh,
The
The
Stuff?
Stuff.
The stuff?
Yes.
It's like
yes.
ice cream that turns you into a zombie.
Yeah, and it grows, and it's sort of like the Blob, but you can eat it. Very, very wacky cult horror movie. And the first Terminator movie, she had that on play. And Alien, I think, no, Aliens. Yeah, the second film. So to say I was like steeped in it from an early age is pretty accurate. And of course, Nightmare on Elm Street kind of
Yes.
changed it all for me. That was like the big intro.
Oh, yeah.
And I really did never sleep again quite the same way. I think it's mostly because I have an older brother who's about 6 years older than me. So he was a teenager when I was just coming up in life. And so he got to all those horror movies first. But my parents were always really into corny horror movies too. Like really B-movie bad stuff like Motel Hell and
Chopping Mall? I remember one as a
Chopping
kid.
Mall. Love Chopping Mall.
At Blockbuster, the little box, the artwork on the box is what sold me as a kid. I was like, can I rent this, please?
See,
So ridiculous.
that is one of the great things we lost with Blockbuster. Kids will never know.
That's true.
Like just walking through looking for a movie. I mean, you talk about just getting it based on the cover, right? Like that's what you did, especially with horror
Absolutely.
movies.
Yes.
And discovering stuff like that because of that. And I'm like you, Allison. I had a sister who was 10 years older than me. And she lived her life to scare me. So when I was, 5 years old, we were watching Nightmare on Elm Street, Hellraiser, all those kind of movies. What's the one with the sphere?
Phantasm.
Phantasm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Classic.
Yes.
An absolute must. I feel like that movie still scares me. Oh, I remember my parents having one of the sequels on, and even that at my very young impressionable age, it was more like the big scary mortician-looking old guy who was scarier than anything to me. Return of the Living Dead. And oh my God, there were so many. Yeah, for some reason, it's that one that got me more than Night of the Living Dead, the original.
100%.
Yeah.
I'm with you 100%. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. I mean, we could talk about this forever, honestly, because there are so many great movies during that time period. And I feel like I guess it just makes it natural that Stephen King being during his kind of hottest, scariest period, as well. There was just a whole zeitgeist around horror back then that I don't know that it's really there now. Although I think social media helps in a lot of ways to talk about
Comes in waves.
Yeah.
Like the 90s was an absolute just wasteland for horror in a lot of ways. But
I'd say Scream was kind of like the ultimate one, right? Stephen King in particular, and why I wanted to talk about him was because, if I wasn't watching a horror movie on TV, I was reading horror in him in particular. As mentioned before in previous episodes of this season, I started reading King at 11. I went to the bookstore with my babysitting money and bought a copy of Misery after seeing the movie. And that was it. Everything from that point on was about me becoming a student of King. I'm not an expert in anything in this world except probably the works of Stephen King. That's about it. But why are we talking about The Mist, guys? Well, That was Brett's fault. And I won't call it fault. Because I did come to you and I said, okay, I want you on my show. And I know you're a cosmic horror guy. Do you like Stephen King? That was like litmus test 1 there. And I said, well, how do you feel about talking about cosmic horror influences of Stephen King? Because we have done that quite a bit on Chris's show. We talked about it and sort of dissected that whole phenomenon and the Lovecraftian influences there. When you mentioned The Mist, Brett, I was like, oh, yes, because to me, I feel like that one is probably the most visibly Lovecraftian of his work. I would say I have a list of other ones that come close, but I would say that one just nails it in a lot of ways. And the beautiful thing about it, it nails it in a very short form. You can read this book in a few hours.
Which is why I think it does that, by the way. Just,
yes,
because Lovecraft never wrote a novel. I mean, he probably never wrote a book or a story longer than The Mist. I mean, The Mountains of Madness or Charles Dexter Ward's probably the longest, but probably not as long as The Mist.
I guess I should ask you first about your interest in cosmic horror in particular. What lit that fire for you?
So, well, as we've said, Michael Jackson and Thriller was my introduction to horror, and then the horror movies, and then when I started reading books, R.L. Stine, who doesn't get enough credit. R.L. Stine deserves more credit for a generation of horror fans and horror readers who were introduced to horror through him. I actually read his Fear Street books, not the Goosebumps. I was a little too old for Goosebumps, so I did Fear Street. I still haven't watched the movies on Netflix. I'm like saving them. I'm really bad about saving things and then never watching it because I want it to be the perfect moment, right? So
right.
You know, yeah, it's the worst. Like the number of like nice bottles of beer that I've let go bad because I'm saving it for the right moment or whatever.
Right.
Anyways, so I got to watch that. But then Poe. So in my mind, and I don't think this is a controversial thing to say, there are 3 great horror masters in American history: Poe, Lovecraft, and Stephen King. And my first was Poe. My dad got me a book with his poems. My dad was like, "You'll love this thing called The Raven. You should read it." And he was right.
Yeah, that's a good intro. How old were you again though at the time?
I was 7 or 8. You know,
wow.
And another thing kids don't have. Do you guys remember the Scholastic reader thing you would get that would have all the books you could order?
Obsessed.
Heck yeah.
Yeah. And
Bookmobile. Whenever that bookmobile came to school, I was in heaven.
No, 100%.
Oh.
And so then Stephen King, I started reading in high school. So I was a little bit later to it than you. I'd never read Stephen King, and one of my teachers actually, was like, "You like horror, you should read this book called The Shining. I think you'll like it." And I mean, the only problem with reading The Shining first is it's kind of all downhill from there. I mean, The Shining is still my favorite Stephen King book, but
it's funny, like sometimes the first one does become a favorite. I don't know. My favorite came probably third because I read Pet Sematary, I think, after I went like Misery and then Carrie and then Pet Sematary. And from that point, that was where my mind was officially exploded into a million pieces. And I think I read that book like 24 times throughout my teenage years, which I believe also has a lot of elements of cosmic horror in it, especially, well, I guess it has a Wendigo. A Wendigo is more Native American influence, but I believe that there are contemporaries of Lovecraft that were influenced by those mythologies as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Algernon Blackwood wrote a short story called The Wendigo, which is amazing, and is right around the same time. And people have taken The Wendigo and sort of added it in to Lovecraft's influence, because Lovecraft, not to get ahead of when I learned about Lovecraft, but Lovecraft, despite the fact he hated everybody, hated everybody. Some people say Lovecraft is a racist. He's actually a xenophobe. He hates everybody. So despite that, he was really kind of into using Native American myths and folklore as part of his stories. And in The Wendigo, a lot of people have used that. But as far as Lovecraft goes, I have always been fascinated with this notion that there was something before mankind, right? I mean, that's something I'm fascinated with it to this day, whether it's sort of civilizations that predate what we know about civilization, or just the question of was there anything here before we showed up here or whatnot? You live in a galaxy that's billions of years old.
Right.
The chances that there is some really advanced civilization, pretty high, right? That could have come and gone before we were even, protozoa in the ocean or whatever.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so I always had this thought about that. And then I was in a bookstore and there was a copy of The Call of Cthulhu and Other Weird Tales.
Oh, yeah.
Which is an S.T. Joshi book edited by him. And I picked it up, not knowing anything about it. I just really liked the cover. And I read Dagon, which is the first story, and was like, this is it. I have found the thing. And basically was obsessed with cosmic horror and Lovecraft and all the sort of everything that came after from that point.
Chris recommended, what's the name of that documentary you recommended, Chris?
Oh, goodness.
Fear of oh gosh.
Fear of the Unknown,
Fear
maybe?
of the Unknown, yes. And you can find it on YouTube. It's like H.P. Lovecraft, Fear of the Unknown. And it features a lot of modern day authors influenced by him. Neil Gaiman, John Carpenter, Guillermo del Toro, Peter Straub, rest in peace. Absolutely loved him. It's a number of years old, but you can find it on YouTube and really get a good sense of the life Lovecraft led, and in many ways understand, I think, how his xenophobia both set in and how it informed a lot of his work. I don't know that you can talk about Lovecraft and not talk about some of these things, but living this very sheltered life in Providence, Rhode Island, kind of had to have done that. And, his relationship with his mother, and, as I learning about all these things about him, and it's just like, I felt more than anything a sense of deep sympathy for him, because I don't know that he had a chance to be anything other than what he was. Even when he got married and lived in New York for a time, actually, they said that his living in New York increased his sense of xenophobia and sense of anxiety. He was just a very deeply anxious, physically unwell person as well. So you could just kind of get a sense of the man that created these things. And the writing itself is fascinating too. His style and his, as they call it, purple prose, and the way that he wrote things. And you could see King kind of delving into some of that with some of his writing styles, especially in some of his other stories when he gets more into the epistolary tool, where it's like you're reading diary entries and all these other things that make you feel like you're witnessing someone actually like lose it, actually like, go through hell. When you really start to study Lovecraft and you study King, it's really hard to separate them. You could absolutely see the thumbprint across so much of King's work. Even though their writing styles are completely different, you can tell that King as a child probably just poured through a lot of Lovecraft's work, and to our benefit, honestly. And I should mention, before we really dive into The Mist, because I know that's what we set about to talk about, but I'm leaving that open to other things. But I was making a small list of other Stephen King stories that very much evoke the Lovecraftian thing. So, N from Just After Sunset, I think, is very directly evoking the cosmic horror coming through the portal to wreak havoc in our world. But there's also his novels, From a Buick 8, which I think is one of his lesser known but highly underrated books. I absolutely love this book, and it's so weird because it's just about a remote outpost of Maine, I believe it's Maine, state troopers who tow in this classic Buick car, and they keep it in their like little garage or whatever there because they don't know who left it. They just found it idling on the side of the road, and it's just this weird looking version of a Buick. It doesn't look like it's from this world, but they tow it in, and the trunk regularly opens, and horrors from another realm just come flying out of it at random. And great book, and told in a really great voice too, from the point of view of this kind of run down old trooper. That's what pulls you right in. You feel like you're relating to someone normal who's experiencing this really abnormal thing, which is kind of the magic. of this kind of storytelling. And then I think, Brett, you and I talked about this one a little bit, but his book Revival, which came out, about 5 or 6 years ago. It could be a little bit longer than that. It's a more recent King book. Again, I don't think enough people have read this one. It's very well worth the read, especially for probably the last 30 pages of it. That's because it meanders a little bit in this life of a man who lives as like a traveling preacher, and there's like a faith healing show, and it deals a lot in areas of faith and what happens after you're gone. The last bit of that is really what sticks with me the most, though, because it is horrifying. If you ever think about like peering behind the veil to see the most horrible things you could possibly see, like King did that in the last bit of that book. It's worth picking up, investing a day or two to read it. Crouch End. That's another big favorite of mine. Okay, so he wrote a short story called Crouch End and Nightmares and Dreamscapes, and it's about this couple that gets lost in this part of London that's called Crouch End. One of his most terrifying short stories, in my opinion, because again, these people are in a cab in London and they get lost and things aren't going quite right, and they get out in this area and everything about it is wrong, and everything that happens to them is bad. So, and the funny thing is, I was supposed to go to London before the world shut down, and I actually learned back in 2020 that Crouch End is an actual place in London. I didn't know that. So you can go there, and I had plans to go there. That was like, I was going to go there and see what creepy, horrible things I could find in Crouch End.
Yeah, Crouch End, it kind of reminds me of Langoliers. People have probably know more about Langoliers than do Crouch End, where basically you have something that looks like the world we know, but it's just off just a little bit, right? And you're trying to figure out, like, what is wrong? And there is something so creepy about that. Just your world, but slightly different. It's a good one. That is a good one.
That's almost scarier than like a completely horror night, like nightscape that's just like terror and, you know, the depths of hell or whatever.
Yep.
But yeah, like the feeling that just something is off, I agree, feels even creepier. Just that one little tweak.
It makes it feel plausible. And I think that's really the key to making horror scary. And for me anyway, is if it does feel like something I can really just insert myself into and feel like, oh shit, this feels possible, which is, I guess, why as a kid I was really scared of slashers. I think that all fed into, again, the mood of that era when watching America's Most Wanted and Unsolved Mysteries, and as Ben from 80s High put it, feeling like kids are being murdered everywhere. And so why not? Why wouldn't a slasher be real? Because there are slashers in real life. And so that just made it super scary. I'm not as scared of slashers as I once was. Though the ones that scare me, and this is a tangent, I know, the ones that scare me the most are the ones that the home invader slasher movies, where you're in your house, like Strangers, I think is one. Yeah. High Tension is another one, although that one gets even just crazier as it goes on. And I'm trying to think, I know there are some other ones.
Are you a fan of French horror? Do you like French horror?
Yeah, I am actually.
Have you seen Inside?
Yes.
That's another home invasion-y type one.
Yeah, what is it with the French? Because I think High Tension was also French, if I'm not mistaken.
The French are, man, they're effed up. Like, the freakiest horror movies come from the French, in my opinion.
Which is funny, because people say, oh, Japan and Korean. Yeah, there's some freaky stuff that Japanese and Korean and Chinese cinema have brought us. But yeah, that's a very good point that I think people need to look at. And of course, you know, Italy gets most of the credit, I think, for the European horror. But yeah, the French, they're kind of not as often brought up as good horror makers. But you're absolutely right. And so check that out. And yeah, if you're looking for new scares, I often do feel like we have to look at foreign cinema to get fresh blood, as it were. Because I don't know. I sometimes feel like the American stuff is just, it feels very rote after a while. Whereas other countries and other regions of the world have different storytelling sensibilities, right? So that lends to new scares or new ways to become scared or thrilled, as it were. So let's talk The Mist then, because this discussion should have a focus, I suppose. Now, I came to this story early on in my King reading life. Came to it so early, in fact, that I didn't know that short story collections were a thing as such. I didn't know Skeleton Crew, which is the book that I read it in, was a short story collection. I opened it up and I looked at this listing, but I thought they were just chapters. So I start reading The Mist because it was the first one, and got incredibly involved and invested in this story. And when it ended and I flipped to I didn't know it ended. I flipped to what I thought was the next chapter. I think I read like 3 other stories before I realized that this was not, we weren't coming back to the story. Like, this story was over. And I went to my mom. I'm like, Mom, why is it like this? She was like, these are each individual stories, Allison. This is not one big book. And I remember being crestfallen over that because I so desperately wanted to know more. And as a 12, 13-year-old, I was mad at it, actually. I was like, why isn't there more of the story? He needs to write a whole book about it. And I remember wishing for that my entire teenage life. And of course, it never happened. And now sitting here in my 40s, I think, thank God that didn't happen. It wouldn't have been as good. I don't think it wouldn't have been as memorable. But as a young person, I remember feeling like I really wanted more. But that was my first encounter with this story. What about you guys? Like, when do you remember when you first read this, Brett?
I don't remember when the movie came out, but I do remember when it was because I was working at a law firm at the time.
Yeah, 2007.
Okay, so 2007, the movie comes out. Before that, they re-released Mist as a standalone book.
Yes.
And that's when I picked it up. I was walking by the Barnes & Noble on my way to my office, and I would stop in every now and then and just see what they had. And they had, the presentation of The Mist, and I thought, oh, this will be good. So I picked it up. And not having no idea what it was about, not knowing it had any sort of Lovecraftian elements, just didn't know anything about it, but I like Stephen King, and it looked like a new Stephen King thing. To me, it was new. So I picked it up and read it. And so that was my experience right before the movie came out. So I read the book, and then I subsequently saw the movie.
Now, Chris, you're the noob in this, right?
I can remember when I came across this novella. It was a week ago. No. That's when last weekend, I read it for the first time, and I watched the movie all in one day. So I went through both things in a single day, and that was my experience. Now, I had heard of it. I knew vaguely of the story. And Allison, maybe even a long time ago, we had talked about something and you mentioned, the story The Mist. And so I knew the vague details, but like Brett, I didn't know there was this Cthulhian, cavalcade of monsters hiding in the mist. I just thought it was, I don't know what I thought it was. But anyway, so yeah, that's kind of what I knew going into it. And then only through our discussion and preparation for this show did I know that it was going to happen. But I'm still reading it like, where do these creepy eldritch horrors come in? Like, and then, they obviously present themselves. It's like, oh, this is pretty wild.
Before we continue talking more about it, we're going full spoilers here. We are not holding back. So if you haven't read The Mist, go pick it up. I most recently just listened to the audiobook narrated by Will Patton, who is by far King's, I think, his best narrator. He's narrated several of King's stories. And well worth listening to. You can grab it on Audible or, pick up a copy of Skeleton Crew. Or as Brett said, I think it still is a standalone book. You can grab it. We're just going to go full into this. And I'll start from the beginning, give a basic, lowdown, terrible synopsis. But basically, a big storm happens on this lakeside type community in rural Maine. And a big cyclone spawns over this lake where this husband, wife, and their young son are living. And the storm brings in a lot of damage and knocks a lot of trees down. And the next day, they're cleaning up the damage. And so David, the main character, the little boy, and their neighbor, who is this really douchey lawyer, I should ask you as a quick aside, Brett. Now that I have
I
you
think
here,
Brett knows some douchey lawyers.
No,
I'm gonna
I was
say.
gonna
I'm
say,
sure he knows a couple.
do you get the way lawyers are depicted in stories and movies and other popular culture? Like, do you just let it roll off you, or does it bother you that lawyers are often presented as pompous assholes?
I mean, dealing with lawyers all the time, I can tell you it's a very accurate description of a lot of lawyers, so it doesn't bother me. It's just, that's just reality, unfortunately, for a lot of people in the legal profession. So there's a reason that stereotype exists. Now, granted, there are a lot of great people who have law degrees and are working as lawyers, but yeah, I mean, that didn't bother me.
It's funny. So many of my closest friends in this life are attorneys. And it's probably the professional group that I have the most friends that work in it. Which
it's funny. I know a lot of people who don't want to be attorneys anymore or don't want to be lawyers.
Yes.
Like they're basically working their debt down so they can stop doing anything in the legal profession. It's interesting.
The people you have to look out for are the ones who are very successful at being lawyers. Those are the ones you got to worry about. When I was in law school, we had a guy he had been a surgeon, but he had a cocaine problem. So he lost his medical license. So, of course, he decided to be a lawyer because,
venturing on. So, anyway, douchebag lawyer, David, little boy. They go to the grocery store to get supplies, right? Leaving the wife behind at the cabin. And as they're leaving, they see a thick bank of fog rolling across the lake. And, of course, it's just like, what's that? That looks a little dense. That looks like it has some really defined edges. It's like a weird looking fog, but of course you don't think about it. Who would think about it like that? If I see fog from far away, I think, that's odd. So it gets off right at a pretty steady clip at that point. They're at the grocery store, and then the fog, or the mist rather, rolls completely in. And from that point on, of course, you have tropes forming among the group, and the creatures arrive, and we'll cover that in a bit. What I found interesting was that King has said that he was inspired to write this story when he ventured to the grocery store with his son the morning after a bad storm ripped through their neighborhood. So very much a very similar thing. And he started to imagine when he was in the store, prehistoric creatures and insects flying around inside. And he had pretty much the whole story mapped out in his head.
Wow.
By the time he was done shopping. Let's just talk now about what happens in this grocery store when the creatures show up. And this is the stuff that horror movies are made of, right? Or horror stories of all kinds. You have how the people react to it. And they fall into some very distinct camps. We get casualties right away. There are people that, went out into it and were never seen again, or you just hear their screams and cries. And then there was like this incident in the loading dock at the back of the store with some tentacles. Tentacled creature like comes in through the door and grabs one of the bagger kids and pulls him out, right? Am I remembering this right, Chris? Because I know you most recently read it, but do I have that
that's
right?
The generator's backing up, and they're like, "Oh, we got to unclog the pipe, the exhaust pipe," and
that's right.
This is where you get the macho guys. This is the stereotype of I need to fix this. Like these are the two guys who they want to be the ones to solve the problem and be heroic.
I have it in my notes. I'm calling them the getter-dunners.
It's fairly accurate. Yeah, fairly accurate. And the bag boy Norm seems to kind of agree with that, and he's the one who elects to run outside. Oh, just a quick run around the corner and figure out what's blocking the pipe, and we'll be good to go. And yeah, like you said, we learned pretty quickly that does not add up.
I loved probably the most in that scene was not just the fact that the tentacles were wrapping around this kid, but as they were touching his flesh, it was searing it and melting it. It's not enough to just have a tentacle wrap around you, right? It has to burn you and slice into you. And I remember just being terrified by that when I read it the first time, especially.
And I think, can I back up a little bit to the beginning of this story?
Absolutely, yeah.
Because what I love that King did with this is he, in very subtle ways, builds up a lot of this unease. It's kind of like what you talked about earlier, Brett, with like just one thing is off, right? We had this storm. It's a little weird. There's a fog. Why is it this kind of fog? It's not a normal weather phenomena. This doesn't typically happen. That's odd. People are kind of speculating, but they're still going about their day. We're clearing out the lines. And you just have he really describes the downed power line as like a serpent, just sort of like spitting and writhing. And it, again, I think King does a great thing of like, there's a real thing that's horrible, being electrocuted by a power line. And that's kind of the anchored in reality. But we have this thing we cannot really fathom, tentacles from the mist,
Right.
built around that. And so what I loved about it is the whole business when they're on the property and they're looking at everything, it's just this so creeping. And then they're driving and they're talking about Project Arrowhead and they're speculating what that's all about. And they talk about Miss Carmody. You just get a lot of little subtle beats that pay off later.
Mm-hmm.
You just don't know how. And that's kind of where we arrive at the grocery store. And I loved all that build up. I thought it was just really, I loved it. I thought it was great.
I don't know if you've read The Dance Macabre, one of his books on writing.
Mm-hmm.
There was something he said in that's always stuck with me, and that I think kind of fits this. He talks about that the scariest thing is a closed door, because when the door is closed and the handle's jiggling and you hear something beyond the door, you can't see it. You don't know what it is, but you know there's something there. And it's this building suspense. And whatever's in your mind is so much more frightening than whatever it is. Whenever you open the door, it's like, oh, it's a big hairy monster. I can think about that or whatever. And I feel like in his books and in The Mist, what you're talking about, he is so good about having a closed door where you're slowly getting more and more uneasy and more frightened by what it is, this weird thing that's going on that you don't really know what it is, and it's behind the door, and what exactly is there. And eventually he opens the door because you kind of have to at some point, and that's fine. And he's really good at describing what's behind the door, better than most. But the thing I love about him is that, like, those types of moments at the beginnings of his stories or the beginnings of his novels where he's setting you up to be frightened later on.
Absolutely.
You guys nailed that. And thank you for bringing up Dance Macabre. I feel like, On Writing ended up being probably his most referenced book on writing horror, just because it came out later. It's a bit more recent. I feel like Dance Macabre kind of got lost in the shuffle of time and is referenced, honestly, by probably people who were reading King a lot earlier. You just don't see it as much. And it's a really great book. So highly recommend people check that one out, even now, because you're absolutely right. And that is the horror sensibility that's always gotten me too. And I sometimes loosely call it, and I'm sure other people have as well, the Jaws effect of not seeing the shark until the end, that you see it just enough to know what's happening.
Yeah.
And your brain fills it in for you. It's often does a better job than any best author in the world could. And what I love too in the Mist, in that scene where the tentacled horror pulls poor Norm the bag boy out, is once the door is closed again, you just hear, he describes this hissing of tentacles rubbing all along the outside of the door. So you just know it's out there. And that, for me, was even scarier than him being pulled out by the tentacle itself, because now you can't get out. That thing is out there and it's making itself well known, and there's no amount of holding your hands over your ears and squeezing your eyes shut. It's never going to disappear. It's that old childhood thing that you do to kind of like will the monsters away. It doesn't work here.
Well, and the other thing too is the death is not quick. This thing doesn't just come out and engulf you and you're dead. It is very slow, and it is described in some length, I think, to the effect of like, wow, this thing is just slowly, it's almost like a python slowly consuming an animal, right? It doesn't just chomp you and you're gone. And I thought that was the part that really sat with me. I was like, oh my God, this kid Norm didn't just get pulled away and he's gone.
No.
He's being kind of slowly consumed. And I thought that was the part that really struck me as like, holy crap, this is awful.
That to me too, this story was written in 1980. So this was really at the early part of King's career. Well, as a novelist, as a professional novelist. And In that era of him, I feel like he was most comfortable at really seating himself in those uncomfortable moments and really let that rope just pay out nice and slow. And the reader's just like almost begging him to just let up already. I feel like in later years, he's kind of pulled back from that a good bit. This is like him, I think, at his most merciless as an author. That scene just felt like it was drawn way out. And I don't know how he did it because the story isn't very long, but it feels very packed full of detail. And it's paced in such a way that you don't feel hurried or rushed. And you get to know things about the characters that you would think you were reading a much longer piece of work, but he manages to condense all of that into, I would estimate, I don't know what the official word count, and they don't really release that kind of stuff very easily, but I would guess that thing maybe 35,000 words top end. So not a very long piece of fiction. Very, very well done that way. So after that happens, after poor Norm is pulled out by the tentacle and people are going, okay, so something really bad is happening, right? Because before that, we also have the store manager. And the store manager is still trying to run the store. He's very much fixated on people not stealing.
Can I ask you guys, how long did you... the whole time I'm reading this, I'm like, when is this guy going to finally give up? And he pretty much doesn't. Like, he kind of does, but he's still, even at the end, as everything goes backwards and sideways and upside down, he's still kind of trying to do his job. I found that very fascinating.
He didn't want to leave his post. And to me, I feel like that's plausible as well.
I think it's a coping mechanism. Like, this is my familiar, right?
I feel like if Allison was at TJ's and things went wrong, she'd be doing the same thing. So
I gotta write that bread order, man. I gotta get this stuff in here. No. I mean, honestly, it'd be like, please take the food and eat it, please. But no, I mean, that idea of still trying to function amid everything falling apart.
What's his coping mechanism, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, It's sort of like the guys playing in the band on the Titanic. By the way, again, tiny segue here. I've been watching some videos on the Titanic for future episode purposes and fascinating stuff. But the people that represented the band members that were on the Titanic, like the company that the band members worked for, sent a bill.
Didn't return their uniforms.
Yes. Oh, see, you know about this. Okay. Do you also watch Tasting History with Max Miller? Because I was like on there. A great YouTube channel. By the way, yeah, it was like $5 their families were billed for their suits because they were in the bottom of the Atlantic.
Wow.
So just really
My
messed
God.
up. But those guys played till the bitter end, right? They knew it was coming and they stuck with it.
But that's what you're seeing from pretty much everyone in the store and the different characters is their coping mechanisms coming out. And they're all different. But King just has a way to do it where it feels natural. He's not like, well, this guy's coping mechanism was this. Like, there's a little bit of that conversation. Because when they come back out to the lawyer, Mr. Norton, he flat out refuses to believe anything that he just heard about. But he also refuses to go back into the stock room and see it for himself. He's like, you're just playing a prank on me. And they're like, no, come back and look at it. And he's just like, no. Like, you can just see this man trying to be put together and the denial after denial. And I mean, Allison, I'm sure we're going to talk about this more, but it's like, I just saw this and I'm like, this is all plausible today. He wrote this in 1980.
Yeah.
I think, if anything that recent events have shown us, there is no difference in how people would react right now. No difference. With the technology and the knowledge and the whatever, we're still right there.
This guy was maddening because it really is. Here is reality. Here it is. This is the thing. And he does not want to see it.
Do you guys find him more frustrating than Miss Carmody?
I don't know. So there's a trope in horror that always bothers me, but I'm not sure that it should. And it's the husband or wife who doesn't believe their spouse when like they're ghosts in the house. And they're like, and the spouse is like, look, I saw a ghost. It's, possessing the children. We need to do something about it. And they're like, that's crazy. There's no way. You know, he's always been able to levitate. What are you talking about? It's clearly not a ghost. And it always irritates me because I'm like, just listen to your husband. On the other hand, if somebody told you there's monsters in the mist, there's something in the mist, and there's monsters in the mist, they're going to kill you. I mean, your initial thought's probably going to be like, that's crazy. What are you talking about? That's insane. Like, you lunatic. I don't know what you're seeing in the mist, but there's no monsters in the mist. Like, the mist might be toxic. Maybe it's got some sort of hallucinogen in it, but there's no, like, tentacled monster reaching into the store grabbing people. So on the one hand, he obviously is incredibly irritating, and I hated him, as everyone does. But on the other hand, I mean, he's not unrealistic. There certainly would be people like that. And you wonder how much of that would be you. I mean, how much of you would be like, yeah, I'm not going to go into the mist because who knows what's in the mist, but it's not a monster. There are no monsters in the mist, you know? So I don't know.
Maybe that's the frustration. Like, we almost could envision ourselves being like him, whereas I think the majority of us would not be like Miss Carmody, right? Like, she's really off her rocker before this event happens.
Right.
Bryn is just this average guy. Like, you know, he's a lawyer. He's probably a very logical kind of person in terms of how he sees things. And so, yeah, you can almost envision he's just like, either he just doesn't want to believe it, or, you know, deep down it's just that defense of like, I don't even want to come to terms with this.
I like the extra human element that King gave him as well, where you could see he wasn't looking so well. Even at the beginning of the story, his life had taken a turn. I think his wife had passed away from cancer, and he'd lost weight. He looked very like the wind had been taken out of him. So that's how he started the story, because you have some backstory in there where David, the main character, and Brent have a property dispute that had to go to court, and David won. And so there was already bad blood between these guys. And I think David kind of took some pleasure out of seeing the pompous jerk looking a little humbled, you know. But this is a guy that doesn't take loss very easily at all. And so then he has to admit everything that he's ever come to understand about the universe at all was wrong. And I think that's really hard for some people to do.
I mean, isn't that hard for all of us to do? I mean, is there anyone who, if you had your entire worldview shattered, that you wouldn't react in a similar way? You know, to go back to Lovecraft, I mean, the whole thing about Lovecraft is he says, you know, I can't remember. It's like we're in a black sea of infinity, and it's a blessing that we can't see farther into it. Because if we did, I mean, the thing about Lovecraft is, his thing is, if you see the truth, you go crazy. You're going to lose your mind.
Right.
Your mind's going to shatter, and you're never going to be able to deal with what is actually going on out there. And I feel like with Brent, same thing.
He has like a sand wall kind of built up, you know, and it's leaky as this flood's coming in, this flood of like new information. And he's trying so hard to keep it from coming in. And that's a great observation with Lovecraft and seeing the truth and driving you mad. I absolutely do feel that. And I've been through similar things. Absolutely. Especially through the pandemic. I think when it was like first starting, right? And you're thinking, oh, this is going to be over in a couple weeks. It'll be fine. And then all of a sudden, just things start shutting down. The schools are shutting down. The, you know, flights are shutting down. Everybody that was having a conference, it was like, nope, canceled. And you're still thinking, you're holding on to that thread of like, in a few months, it's going to be over. And we're on 2+ years now of different phases of this. But of course, we've all seen these things play out on a larger scale.
I think that's such a great point. I mean, the pandemic, it's a good example. It's sort of a slow moving mist, I guess, you know, and you see sort of all the different characters from the mist in just what we've seen. And I remember just an anecdote on this, you know, March is when it happened, right? I think March 13th, Friday the 13th was the day everything kind of fell apart. And I'm a lawyer. I'm a prosecutor. For those of you guys who don't know, we have a grand jury every month. And so obviously we canceled the April grand jury. And then we don't have a grand jury in May. And we do have a June grand jury. And in like April, we're like, well, should we cancel June grand jury, or will this be over by then? And we had a serious discussion about whether this would be over by June of 2020. And obviously It was not. And I think you're right. Just adapting to reality, even when it's pouring down around you, is really hard to do.
Yeah, you ultimately do feel like that, oh, the better forces will eventually prevail, and perhaps in some ways they have. We got the vaccine, and we did all this stuff, and not to get into that rabbit hole, but in the meantime, you have the Mrs. Carmody element, which is, while we're in this holding pattern of waiting to see what happens, we have this whole other subset of people that are certain beyond any doubt whatsoever what's happening, even if they're wrong, even if it's batshit. And here's the thing, and why, Chris, when you said, were we more frustrated with Brent than Mrs. Carmody? Absolutely, because you kind of expect a Mrs. Carmody at this point. And maybe that's 2022 Allison talking, after seeing the mental gymnastics people have gone through and talking about this pandemic. And you always wait for that person because that person is always going to show up. So nothing about her was like surprising to me at this point in my life. The stuff she was saying now, I think, was out there even for today.
I don't know, though, because she starts off like the town joke, right? And at the end, she has a following. That's the scary thing. And I think we can draw a lot of fairly recent parallels of someone who's the people talking a lot of crazy, and somehow that has gotten a lot of traction. For a lot of the reasons I think we're kind of talking about, where all of a sudden the like lizard people running the world is now like believed by more people than I think we would want to suspect.
Wait,
and so
are you saying they don't run the world?
No, there's no lizard people in the lair beneath my...
Yeah, you might want to be careful there.
You live in Seattle, Chris, where there is
all
like a
tunnels.
City beneath the city. I mean...
Who lives in those tunnels?
Man.
Lizards.
What do they not want us to know? Yeah, it's... But no, I think that's the interesting trajectory, is she starts off as just this, like, people that everyone just sort of like, oh, there goes old Miss Carmody again. And then she's got these disciples at the end, and they actually rally around her to stop other people from leaving. They're just trying to go, like, leave, and she won't even let them do that. Like, that's how much power she gets. It's
because she wants a human sacrifice. I mean, that's what this comes down to.
Well, she does go to that too.
She's... Oh, my
Expiation.
God.
Expiation.
Allison, you know what this all reminded me of? This reminded me of our episode, the first episode where we talk about Devil's Interval, and I was thinking of lasciviousness, licentiousness,
Perniciousness.
expiation.
Yeah. Oh my God. And the way that Will Patton narrates her in the audiobook, by the way, is just...
Oh, nice.
He goes fully unhinged. It's really, really well done. But yes, and the fact that she's going for the child, that's the peak. But, within that, again, you can see this play out. And I think maybe King was, this is, again, 1980. I think this is right around the time of Jonestown, if I'm not mistaken. Seeing cults and how they form and what they do and that kind of stuff. Again, at that time of the world, that time that things were going down when that story was being written, I feel like he could pull from some very easily accessible examples the way that we can, if this story were written today.
That was 1978, so just before.
Yeah, okay. So that was to bring up the Z word again, the zeitgeist. And studying cults in my own spare time, because it's a hobby, I love studying cults. You need to have that element of desperation with your followers. They need to have something to cling to. And boy, did they have it in this grocery store. If you're in that situation where otherworldly creatures are trying to like claw through and get in and eat you, you might be willing to listen to.
You can't walk 5 feet out the door.
Yeah.
Literally. Like, that's terrifying.
Yeah, it's like the modern example of like a solar eclipse, right? Like a solar eclipse happens 5,000 years ago, and you're like, oh my God, the sun is being eaten. Like, we must do something, right? And you can sort of imagine how people were like, murder someone. We gotta... Oh, we killed him, and now the sun's not being eaten anymore. Well, we should keep doing that, right? Like, you can see how that goes. And this is sort of the modern example of that. I mean, one thing I definitely want to point out, because I feel like King gets an unfair criticism, is that this was somehow anti-religious. Like, this is anti-religion. And King gets that a lot. Like, it's anti-religious. And I think people are completely missing the point. Like, yes, Mrs. Carmody uses religion to sort of channel her fanaticism, but this is fanaticism, particularly in cults, many different versions of that. It can have a religious aspect or not. I mean, Nexium, for instance, is basically a self-help group that turned into a sex cult, right? There's nothing religious about it. But this fanaticism can take hold no matter who you are or what you think. And I feel like that is a much more complex thing than just to be like, oh, well, Mrs. Carmody's this crazy religious person. And I feel like people miss that sometimes when they read The Mist, and I think that does King a disservice.
Oh, I think you're right. Well, King has explored spirituality in a lot of his work, and no, I definitely agree with you. If anybody comes at King thinking that he is trying to be anti-religion or anti-spiritual or anti-God or anything like that, I definitely think that that definitely misses the point. This is what's scary about her, though, is that anybody who grew up, which I did, being shipped off to a Baptist church at a very young age because my mom, she was going through a born again phase and she wanted me to go to church. And so she didn't really shop around the church, though. So this was a hardcore church, man. And the things that were being taught to us kids, like little kids, this hellfire and brimstone stuff that was just like terrifying. It was nightmare inducing for me as a kid. I remember just like laying there in bed every night and just like praying, like, please don't send me to hell. Please don't send me to hell. I was like terrified of hell. And that's the kind of stuff that Mrs. Carmody like calls on, that kind of like appealing to the baser nature of humanity in a lot of ways, where it's all about like punishment and trying to make good and sacrifice, like human sacrifice. It's very old world. So having been steeped in that as a kid, we're brought up around any kind of hellfire and brimstone religion, and then you're put into a desperate situation like that, and someone is just repeating it to you ad nauseum. Again, to call back episode 1, what was it, Chris? Repetition legitimizes. Like, you got someone that won't shut the hell up. And that's the thing they describe in the book. Like, she stayed up all night long.
She never slept. She didn't sleep.
She preached all night this stuff. Then you add that element of not just the tentacled creature outside, because later on at night, when night falls, shit gets real. They put these fertilizer bags up to kind of block the windows because these flying maggot creatures attach themselves to the
sucker,
windows.
Like, ugh.
Yeah. So one of his better descriptions.
And then there's some kind of like almost pterodactyl type thing that's eating the sucker bugs. But again, it's interesting. Like another author, all of the monsters would be working together. Like they're all on the same side. But this is more just like an ecosystem of these nightmare creatures that are coexisting like any creatures in the wild here. It's not as if all bugs are working together, right?
That makes me think of something, you guys. Like,
what?
Were the creatures scared? What were they going through? They're just minding their own business. And then all of a sudden this portal opens and here they are.
I mean, an octopus got to eat is all I'm saying, right? Like, and if we know anything from it, it's that fear is really tasty. It salts the meat. So, I mean, that was just like, that was just like a buffet. That was a little buffet right there.
There is sort of like this weird jingling chaos going on outside among the creatures.
Yeah, and it's not trying to like break in. It's not like the tentacles they're feeling around for a space, but it's not like it's gripping the building and ripping the roof off and scooping up people. It's just like this thing that's there. And I think what's creepy is you don't get a sense that it has this like intention of hunting them around. It's just sort of existing. And to me, again, I feel like that's a little creepier than like, I'm going to kill you, kitties. Like it's really more like this is just a creature existing. But this is what it does.
Just minding its own damn business.
Honestly, yes. You're just a casualty of being near this thing that wants to feed.
It's like the jungle came to you. So.
Very true, right? Oh,
So we have then, okay, we got our denialists, we have the renegade spiritualists, we have the shrinking violets. There are a few of those, the ones that just kind of hang back. They don't really pick a side. They're just kind of like, what do we do? And then I really loved some of the maternal elements in the story, like
the
that were trying to,
caretakers. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. That's a good one. Because I do feel that there would be those as well. They would kind of rally around the young people.
It was Mrs. Repler, and she was a badass too. That's what I loved about her. And I think in the movie she had a flamethrower even with like a can of spray. And I was like,
She had Raid in the
That's what
story.
it was. There were a couple people like her and Ollie Weeks are the two that I was like, these guys were so great. Like they were people that, like the main protagonist, you just know in these movies and books, they're going to rise to the occasion, right? Like that's why we follow those people.
I'm going to pour one out for Ollie right now.
I know, right?
He was
For
great.
real.
I mean,
For real.
He was this absolute badass in a lot of ways. He stepped up to the plate, man. He was ready. He was kind of the get her done type, but also like
he was also a sharpshooter. He was also
he took the gun. He was ready.
And again, he's not the guy you would think would have the gun. You'd think it would be, I don't know, somebody else, like one of the more hop to it, like I'm going to take charge kind of people. But it's just this guy who's trying to do the right thing, who also happens to have done a lot of target practice. And
wait, no, he was in Vietnam, because I remember
was
he was.
Okay.
Yeah, there was like a line of dialogue where he was like, "This was like, non-believe me, I was there," and so yeah, he was a war veteran, which really helped a lot too. But all the camps are set. They decide, hey, there's a pharmacy next door. What happened over there? Why haven't we heard from any of those people? What's going on? They decide to go on a little expedition to the pharmacy next door.
Because sucker bugs aren't awful enough.
Hold on a second, though. Before that, I missed something, because the denialists get their comeuppance where Mr. Norton and a few others are like, screw it, we're getting out of here, which you have to expect is going to happen, right? There are going to be people that are going to go out. They're like the people that are going on a cruise in late 2020.
It's a very made for movie moment where it's like, we're going to give you this line and we know it's 300 feet long, and it's just made for a movie to have someone feeding the line to see if this guy, like how far he can make it. Can you get, I think he's trying to get to the truck, right? Or the 4x4 or something. And it's this like biker guy, I think, who's leaving. And he's like, he kind of reluctantly is like, I'll do it. Cause Brent's like, nah, I'm not going to do anything for you. Like he's kind of a jerk up to the end. He can't even do this little favor of like, we just want to see how far you get. And you know, what kind of, if you're leaving, do us this favor. And this guy does, but it's very much that moment, because then there's tension on the line and pulls back and screams in the movie, pull back like a severed in half corpse.
The denialists get taken care of in one pretty fell swoop at that point. So it's after that when they're like, okay, let's go next door, see what's what. For me, this is the scariest part of the whole damn thing. Oh God.
Really creepy. And gross.
You know, I don't even think you need to be afraid of spiders for this to be terrifying, but I was. And yes,
which I am,
there are spiders.
well.
Yeah. And so they go next door, and to start off, and again, one of those details that pays off later, remember they're going in, the power has been out. They have a generator at the grocery store, but at the pharmacy, they don't have that. So they have the door chalked open to let air in. And that's what eventually kills it, because when the mist rolls in and all the creatures that come with it, they go right through that damn door, and nobody had any hope whatsoever. So they get over there, and there's all these strings and strands hanging from the ceiling. And come to find out, as they kind of like touch people, as they fall, they burn the flesh of whomever they touch.
Of course they do.
Yeah, because of course. And that's, as if that isn't scary enough, the spiders. One of the small ones he described as the size of a Cocker Spaniel. So that just gives you a sense of scale already. And they're brightly colored, like bright red eyes, and, you know, just, yeah.
I've asked you two of King lovers. Has he ever admitted that this has any relation to it, like this cosmic creature from another? My guess is no, but it is kind of in its, I guess what we could call its most natural form, that at least on Earth, its representation is a spider. Is there ever any admission that these are linked or just totally separate? I mean, this is all near Portland, Maine. Like they both take place in that same area. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I've never seen it. Have you ever seen it part of like the multiverse or?
No. Now I know that he has. Somebody asked him whether or not the Dark Tower, the bad guy in the Dark Tower, whose name? Yeah, Randall Flagg. Mm-hmm. Somebody asked him once if Randall Flagg and it met up, what would happen? And he said something like, "How do you know they're not the same thing?" Right? So I think there definitely is a possibility that there is a link there, even if he has never said it. Because, I mean, obviously, it is a cosmic entity in the sort of like Lovecraft. There's that one scene in It where one of the kids sort of sees, he has like a vision of prehistoric world and it coming to Earth or whatever. So, yeah, I mean, I could see that. You
know, for us tower junkies out there, I mean, to me, that's just like whatever level of the tower these things came from is probably shared, you know, among a lot of levels. I mean, gonna try not to go down that road. Dark Tower is my obsession. So, but no, I've never seen it expressed outright, but I do feel like there's definitely a lot of commonality there. Enough for us to be able to say, yeah, I could definitely see that. And I would imagine if our own headcanon, if we express that to King, he'd be like, oh yeah, that sounds fine, whatever. And I'm not going to attempt the Mainer accent tonight or ever.
Going down there, huh? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you got closer than I ever would. So they go to the pharmacy to try to see what they can see and see if they could rescue anybody or whatever. And of course that's an absolute fail. And they said that 6 of them left, or 6 of them
and
went.
2 came back.
2 or 3. I think it was Ollie, David, and Mrs. Repler came back. So it was 3 survived, and I think it was like 6 or 7 that left. And they died horribly, of course. It was just one of the scariest things. And we're talking about walking all of 20 feet to get to a door. And this is what happens. So you really start to get this sense of like, oh my God, we can never get out of here. We can't even get 20 feet away, let alone, you know, out of the building or down the road, as it were.
And they're not being like eviscerated by spiders. It's just the webs are falling on them. Like that's the creepiest part to me. It's not like this creature is gnawing at your face. It's just, you know, we've all walked into spider webs and you don't see them. So just imagine these like descending strands of acid web or whatever it is.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
That's the like gruesome part of it. It's
yeah, I think almost everyone who died in that adventure died from the spider web itself. So
I think so.
Yeah, so they get back in, and I think that's when we're entering then rapidly the kind of final act of the story, where you have David, Ollie, and Mrs. Repler, and there's another woman.
There's Amanda Dumfries, right? The younger woman.
Which there's an element of that. That's like my one kind of like thing with this story is that like they're in the book anyway. I can't remember if this was in the movie.
It wasn't. King likes to do odd sexual side quests in his stories. It's like he goes away from the main quest line to be like, oh, and here's a bizarre, out of place, often just unnecessary sex scene. He does that a lot of his stuff that I've read.
Almost ruined it for me.
Yeah.
We don't have to get into it, but like that whole thing, I was like, what in the world is happening right now? I don't understand why we're doing this. Where is the editor? There should be an editor.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, like, there is no way an editor today I don't think that would have ever passed muster, and it shouldn't have then either.
Yeah. Well, and I think I told Allison when we talked about it on my other podcast, we were like, if you trim away 25% of it, there's a really good story in there. It's got a lot of padding. I think you even said, was it Tommyknockers is even worse?
King even admits it. He says it's a great 300-page book and a 700-page, which I love the Tommyknockers myself, but I do admit, yeah, sure. there's padding.
And not to go off on a tangent here, but Star Wars.
Bring it.
So why is the original trilogy so good? Because there were people who could tell George Lucas no, right?
Yep.
That's why particularly the first and second are really good. His wife, other people could tell him no, could say the dialogue's terrible, we need to cut this, we need to rearrange this. That's why it was amazing. By the time King does it, nobody can tell him no, right? So that's the problem.
Yeah.
And there's a bit of the aspect from the publishing standpoint of like, he's already made us this much money. He's going to keep making us this much money no matter what he does. So they'll just let him push whatever he wants. And I mean, this happened with Game of Thrones as well, where Martin's books are probably some of the most poorly edited books out there, in terms of just needing to cut some stuff and,
J.K. Rowling.
Yeah.
Harry Potter.
Oh, yeah.
And I know we don't talk about Harry Potter, but like the first Harry Potter book is like this long and it's great, right? And the last Harry Potter book is this long and it's like, do we really need it to be this long? And it's
especially since it's all filled with her killing everyone in the story. I mean...
No, it's camping. It's 3/4 camping, and then like the last 80 pages are amazing, and it's like, make the entire book amazing and it's worth it. But yeah, I think, and that's the beauty of this story, I think, for King, who can be tangential. Sometimes this book or this novella is so just lean into the point, and I just savored all the details. I was just really engrossed by it. And yeah, the weird kind of sexual thing, I was like, yeah, okay. But like that aside,
crisis boning. I mean, that's pretty much what
I mean,
it was.
I was just going to say, it was like the carnal thing that comes out when, like, I guess, yeah, you're like crisis boning. That's just the better way to put it. So we'll leave it at that. But King does this really interesting thing in this one that he's also doing in another story we're talking about in the Everything's Eventual episode we're doing, Allison, which is Everything You Love Will Be Carried Away. Is that what that short story is called?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Is he reveals a huge thing in just a sentence, and he's just kind of talking, and all of a sudden, and at the beginning of this story, he's like da 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 da, and that's the last time I ever saw my wife again, and I was like, what?
Stephen King is the only author that can get away with that, because I've tried doing that in my own work and have had my hand slapped so many times by editors. They're like, because it's like a form of narrator intrusion, I think is like what it is. Like if it's like almost breaking the fourth wall in a sense, because you're stepping outside the narrative to tell the reader like, hey, this happens later.
Like, even though this is like him narrating from the future,
sounds like foreshadowing to me.
Right. And some editors, I'm just not going to go down that road, because editors, let's just say some editors aren't.
Some lawyers, some editors. Look, we're not across the board here, folks.
Hashtag not all. So aside from that weird sexual interlude thing, which honestly, if this were like, if we were watching The Walking Dead, I could see those two hooking up a little further down the road. Maybe once they try to get home and they realize, okay, the wife's probably gone, maybe we can crisis bone.
Yeah,
but not
like in more
that.
story.
I mean, my God, you're only in this thing for 12 fucking hours and you're already screwing this woman. I mean, that's the thing about this story, is that it doesn't take place over a very long period of time. It really is like a day and a half.
I think it's like 3 days, because they spend a couple nights there.
You're right. Long enough for the milk to go sour, because there's no power and it's not cold.
Another aside, this was my problem with 28 Days Later, which I know everyone loves, but it's like, it's been 28 days and the military guys have already lost their mind, and they're so deprived of women that they're like trying to set up a trap to get people to come so they can have their way with them. It's like,
that's how quickly you can form a sex cult. I mean, that's really
28 days apparently. That was like, oh, okay.
I saw that book on the shelf, 28 Days to Make Your Own Sex Cult. I think I saw that on the shelf. Yeah.
That should be a how-to manual.
I got it much like you, Brett. I got it because of the title. I was like, in the book cover, I was like, this is what sold me. Just like you with Cthulhu and the Mountains of Madness.
So, but yeah, aside from that, they decide, okay, they're noticing how many members Mrs. Carmody is pulling into her little congregation. And it grew kind of exponentially, in the sense of like, it went from having 2 to 8 members very quickly. So they decide, time to get the hell out of here. because they're seeing Miss Carmody getting crazier, more people going to her side. There's also the fact that the provisions aren't going to last forever.
Well, and there's already mumblings of a human sacrifice, right? Like, she's floated this idea before, so it's not, the end is not where we first hear it. She's kind of just putting that out in the ether, like, let me just throw this out to the audience, see what they think. Human sacrifice? No? Okay, I'll put a pin in it. Come back later.
She's going full Mayan, like Mayan god. Anybody see Apocalypto, Mel Gibson's movie
Did
Apocalypto?
not.
Like that moment, actually pretty good movie, but there's a lot of that. Like cut the head off, roll him down the pyramid, appease the gods.
It's efficient.
Done.
Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. So
Hey, when the sun's getting eaten, you got to do something.
I mean, come on now.
it was originally like David was kind of worried and Ollie, they might be sacrificed, but no, she's going for the kid.
Billy.
5-year-old little Billy, like thinking, well, I guess if you're gonna like sacrifice, then yeah, let it be the pure young child.
Which, by the way, King loves calling Billy's Big Bill. Like, he does that in It. That's what they refer to the main character.
Oh.
They
True.
call him Big Bill in there.
does.
And he did in this one, too. I was like, he's got a thing about calling boys Big Bill. I thought that was weird. He uses it both times. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know
Well, that's
that.
only because I listened to the 46-hour audiobook of It,
Yeah,
narrated
I
by
haven't
Steven
done that.
Weber, who's also a great narrator of his works. But yeah, it was.
Agreed.
I found that weird because I don't think they ever call him Big Bill in the other iterations of, like, in the
Iterations.
the other, what's the word I'm looking for? The other versions, the movies or the miniseries. But anyway,
Going all the way back to the beginning of our conversation, the miniseries It, that was another sort of formative moment for me.
yes.
And I've been told if you watch it again, it's not as good as you thought it was when you were a kid. So I'm never going to watch it again. But at the time, that was totally freaky.
Brad, don't watch it again. Keep that childhood piece, because I have seen it later. It's not as good, but I'm like you. Like, my memory of that and just like looking out across the barrens and seeing the clown and Tim Curry waving, you're like, oh, hiya, Georgie.
Exactly.
Oh, it's so
that
good.
and Salem's Lot and the, like, on the window, the...
Yeah. Oh God, stop it, that kid. Oh God. All right, I got to give a shout because about Salem's Lot. They did a remake on TNT. I think it was Rob Lowe and what's his name? Tears in the Sun or Tears in the Rain. Blade Runner guy. Rutger Hauer, right? Is that
Yeah.
it? Yeah, he
May
was
he rest
the
in peace.
big baddie vampire guy. Yeah. So really, really decent
Really?
remake. I
Okay.
recommend people check that out. It came out. Oh, I think it was like close to 20 years ago. Maybe.
Wasn't it Rob Lowe in The Stand, too?
Yes, he was.
Okay, I thought.
Yeah.
Did he play a guy who was mute or deaf or something?
I thought he played Larry Underwood.
No, maybe I'm thinking something
Baby,
else.
Can You Dig Your Man?
Oh, I'm thinking of a different. Never mind, different character.
Speaking of Salem's Lot, there's a short story by King called Jerusalem's Lot, which is very Lovecraftian. So.
Add that to your list. Get Night Shift. Just get and read every story in Night Shift. It is amazing. The Ledge.
The Ledge, God.
Dear
that was-
God. Woo! Yeah. The Ledge is going to be on an episode.
Does Night Shift also have the one where the guy's smoking? He's trying to stop smoking? Yeah.
Yeah.
So good.
Quitters Inc. I think. Yeah. That's a good one.
You guys are selling me. I'm gonna have to, as soon as we're done recording, I'm gonna have to go.
That
and
is his
download
best
that.
collection, in my view.
Interesting. Okay. Nice.
I got to agree. His everything, we're going to talk about Everything's Eventual. That is like
That's a good one,
my
too.
second favorite. But Night Shift is absolutely classic must read King, and some of the scariest things he's ever written in that collection.
Brad, have you read A Man in the Black Suit?
I have not. I don't.
Oh, that's
think.
from Everything's Eventual. That's a good
Okay.
one. Man in the Black Suit.
That collection and 1408 in that one. We're
1408,
going to
yeah.
talk about that one
good
as
one.
well.
Good.
One of the best haunted house stories. As a haunted house guy, you should definitely get that collection and read that story.
Maybe a crime con. I have to be in room 1408 at Bally's. Let's see if that'll.
I look for a 1408 in every hotel I stay in.
That's
if I know
hilarious.
Wow.
that there's a 14th floor, I go up to it and I look for a 1408. I actually found
That's
one
hilarious.
the last hotel I stayed in. Yeah, I have to do it. Again, the depth of my King obsession is unmatched by few. So, okay, so I did mention, of course, these are some of the scariest set pieces, horror sequences I think King has ever written. To be honest, I think they stand the test of time after having like read it as a kid and being horrified, reading it now, and I've read it a couple times in between. It holds up so well. The other one that happens, and I'll get to this now because they decide to escape. So they have 7, I think, in their proposed crew, but they don't all make it because there's a final standoff with Mrs. Carmody and her crew. And while I am not the most, that's not true. I do kind of wish violence on some people, but the moment, because she's reaching like fever pitch, right? They're getting ready to reach for this kid. Everybody is in peak hysteria mode. And then Chekhov's gun goes off, and Mrs. Carmody's
Ollie for the win. Bright
yellow suit is marred red in the gut. And in that moment, I was just like, oh, yes. And then I was like, well, it couldn't have gone any other way. They had to save the kid. The kid was going to get thrown out
You
there.
could see that going a completely different direction and almost becoming a different kind of horror story where she's successful at it. And yeah, that's definitely one of those deaths where you're like, it is a huge sense of relief in an otherwise unrelenting story where everything is just awful.
It's like every Disney movie teaches me. Sometimes somebody has to die, you know. Scar has to be eaten by the hyenas. And the guy in Beauty and the Beast has to fall to his death. And that's just the way it is. So
Bambi's mom.
Well, that was more tragic, but yes.
I'm not equivocating here.
None of us are sad Miss Carmody bit it. That's
right,
for sure.
Exactly.
I know I'm speaking more to the listeners out there because I don't know if everybody's in this with me or not. But if you've read the Dark Tower series, book 4, Wizard and Glass, there is a witch character in that story that is the main driver of a lot of the tragic events that happened. And I am almost positive that Mrs. Carmody was a early template for that character. And anybody out there listening, if you agree with me, reach out because I would love to hear from you on that. Because they even talk about how, like, if people were having problems getting it up or there were some other, like, issues that they had, that, like, she would have a remedy for them. Like, she was like the town witch. She really was. So
expiation.
I think King likes to delve into things about pious women. I think there is definitely a underlying thing there for him because women like this have popped up in a few of his stories, which is interesting. So at this point, Mrs. Carmody, she's dead. We're nearing the end of the story. And at this point, again, 11, 12, 13-year-old me, however old I was at the time, had no clue that this was like truly the end. So I'm reading this like, oh, they're getting out and then they're going to go like explore this whole world. Well, what happens? They get to the car. I'm just going to jump ahead because it's a little eventful, right? Ollie doesn't make it. He dies on the way in a very unceremonious death, by the way. He just steps outside and basically gets chopped in half by something out there. It's just like, oh, our other hero, probably the most heroic character of the story, opens the door, steps outside, bam, dead. Kind of another horror-y trope. I think we've seen this happen in some other stories. They get to the car or the 4-wheel drive because he drives a Jeep or whatever. And they all pile in and they start driving.
Well, and another thing that we haven't talked about is while they're in there, they keep feeling these tremors that they think is an earthquake. And you get the sense that the earth is just sort of like, it's almost like Pangea is coming apart, right? Like the continent, it's just like these fault lines and rips. So like they're not even sure they can get around anywhere. They don't know what the earth is going to even be like. Are there going to be these huge chasms where once there was a road, or is it going to be like 6 feet higher? And so it's like, you can't get over it. And part of having the 4-wheel drive is they can sort of get through some of those crazy ruts that have just been like, and we don't know what made them.
Well, when he mentions a creature that is so high up that you could look up like a skyscraper almost and see its eyes. And then they talk about the footprints that it leaves behind and how we can't see the bottoms of them. And that is also terrifying to me. Like this sense of scale, it's hard to imagine.
Oh, because it's kind of coming at them as they're driving and they're afraid it's going to like crush them, and it just sort of it goes overhead, and oh my god,
I imagine that's how it feels when I'm at work and someone nearly runs into me, like this very tall person just like towering over them.
In some ways, that's the most sort of Lovecraftian point in the book, because you have these creatures that are so massive that they have no real, they don't even know about you. They might step on you, but it's completely accidental because they are so far beyond you. They're not concerned with you, right? Like the little spiders and the bugs, they're concerned with you. The massive creatures, they are so far beyond you.
It's funny, again, I'm going to evoke it. Like that giant creature thing was probably looking for its mom. And it's like, how did I get here? And he's just walking around. It doesn't matter that he's stepping on humans, that their whole world has been subsumed, because these creatures, I would like to think he's not ascribing a moral to them. They're just there, which is another thing I like about it. It's unlike, say, like big ugly creature equals evil. Like it doesn't feel that way. It's not, he doesn't Tolkienize it that way. You know,
and
what
a
I
lot
mean?
of cosmic horror that, again, Lovecraft created, a lot of them are sort of these ambivalent creatures that are so above us, these ancient, massive, giant creatures. They're either evil and mean and they're trying to like destroy us, or they're just so completely uninterested in anything that we have to do or say or believe. And so I think that aspect definitely is nothing here has evil intent. I think everything here is just existing.
You can't reason with them.
Right.
You can't.
There's no motive. I think you're right. There's no motive.
And as they're traversing this landscape, you get a sense of how absolutely broken everything is. And of course, spoiler, he tries to go back home to find his wife with his weird lover chick in the car.
Little weird.
Yeah, would have been awkward.
Now, remind me, they don't find her at all, right?
Not in the book.
No,
Not in the book.
They can't even get down the road.
That's
You're
right. That's right.
Yeah. And I guess, okay, so we'll get to that. We're about to get to that point.
Let's get to the end of the book story. Yeah.
They find a hotel, and then it ends on the briefest flash of hope, which is he thinks he hears a radio signal.
Yeah.
And he decides they have a destination.
It's Hartford, right? Is that what he hears? Is the word Hartford? Yeah.
And then they just kind of end it. We don't know what happens to them from that point.
There's a lot of ambiguity. We don't know where these creatures came from. We don't know what's going to happen. I love that aspect. I'm curious what you two feel. Did you want more answers? Did you like the open-endedness?
So I do. I always like that mystery and stuff like that. I think it's a problem. I mean, look, Stephen King's a genius. And there's any question about that. I think I talked about earlier, Poe, Lovecraft, King. I think King is the best. I think Poe was very sort of about people. Like all his stuff was very personal. And Lovecraft was very cosmic. He was terrible at people. He never had characters because he couldn't do characterization, right?
Right.
King brings it all together. So you have sort of cosmic horror, you have the bad place, but you also have people, real people that you can relate to.
Right.
And the genius of King, much like Lovecraft never described what you saw, right? I mean, it's sort of almost like a cliche. It was so horrible that to describe it would be impossible. So I'm not even going to try, right?
Right.
And King does it in a less cliche way where he's so good at giving you, we talked about the door earlier, he's so good at giving you everything you need in your own mind to develop thoughts and to think about it, but to leave you wanting more. And by leaving you wanting more, I think that's so much better than tying everything up in a bow, right? So what I love about The Mist is you don't know where it came from, and you don't know where it goes, and you don't know where it ends, and that just keeps you thinking about that story for just, I mean, I remember finishing it and just thinking about it for just, seems like days on end to this point, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't know.
I agree with you both. The ambiguity serves it in a much greater way. And I hate to mention my own writing here, and I'm not going to go too far into it. When I do write stories that are speculative on this front, and maybe I'm lazy. There is maybe a little bit of laziness. I don't like explaining the origins of anything. because to me that's not interesting. It doesn't matter.
Right.
It doesn't change what's happening. It doesn't alter the outcome of anything. So why am I wasting time on the why of this phenomenon?
So this is why I don't like the movie as much, because they try to explain too much. They don't leave any open ends in the movie.
No. And I feel like there is definitely a Hollywood element happening here. Okay, so we're going to talk about the movie, which was directed by and written for screen by Frank Darabont, who was responsible for...
He's also a genius.
He absolutely. The Shawshank Redemption is my favorite film of all time. That's my favorite movie. But then he also did The Green Mile, also did a fantastic job on that great adaptation.
And The Walking Dead. And everybody in the mist is in The Walking Dead.
Oh my God, there's so many people. I was like, Walking Dead, Walking Dead, Walking Dead.
The first season, right? Like, didn't he didn't go beyond the first season.
He did the first season, then he got fired.
Oh, that's right, he did get fired. Okay, yeah. I don't know what he's doing now. I haven't, that wasn't part of my homework. I didn't look up where is Frank Darabont today.
But it is funny you said that, Brett. I was like, oh, that was Andrea. Oh, that was like the guy in the camper. I can't remember his name right now. I was like, oh, yep. There's like 3 people, Melissa McBride, who did not get enough of a role in this movie, but still, because she's amazing. But yeah, oh, so good.
Yeah, and I like Thomas Jane. It was a good cast, and was it Marcia Gay Harden was?
She was amazing. She should have won like an Academy Award for that.
She did a great. My only thing would be like I imagined her much older in the book, but so what? You can make that adjustment easily enough.
Did either of you watch the movie recently?
I have not. I was going to, and I just after you. It's been about since it came out.
I've seen it many times.
I said, tell me this. At the beginning, is David, that's the main character, right? David?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Is he painting Roland?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I'm not
all his paintings are Stephen King book
all
covers.
of them. Okay. I was wondering, I saw that one and I was like, I think that's the Gunslinger from Dark Tower series, but I've never read it, so I didn't know. So, okay. I figured.
Which is really interesting because I wonder if Whelan is his last name. He does a lot of the art for the Dark Tower series. Like, did he Michael Whelan? Thank you, Self, who came up with that correct answer.
Thank me.
Sorry, thank me for coming through with the fact at the last second. Curious how that worked out. Like, can we just pretend this character painted your brilliant illustration? I've forgotten about that. Thank you for bringing that up, because once you said that, I was like, oh, I remember when the movie began that way, and I was like, huh,
right,
that's interesting. Darabont is very clearly a Stephen King fanboy, and I love those little touches that he put in that. And the production values were good. I can't say that it was badly made because I don't think Frank Darabont is capable of making something terrible. But there was and maybe I need to watch it again because Brett, you've seen it a lot. Chris, you just watched it. So we're all coming at this from very different angles. That it was very paint by numbers-y compared to the book. And maybe it's because we knew the story first. So I don't know if I brought that into it when I watched it. Like, I read the book and I knew exactly what was going to happen. So when it hit those beats in a certain way, I was just like, I don't know. There's something about it just didn't sit right in my brain.
Brad, you're used to prosecuting things. We need you to defend now this story. Can you? What is your best defense for the? No, just kidding.
Switch to the defense. But then again, this is a terrible prosecution in my brain.
I mean, I'll just say, number one, I love the movie. I love the book. I love the movie. I thought the movie did a great job of bringing the book to the screen. Okay. And, I like the ending of the book, but I loved the ending of the movie to the extent that watching it in the theaters, I was laughing. I was laughing with joy at the end of the movie, which was awkward because all these people were looking at me like, why are you laughing? Because I was so happy that they went there. I was like, this is amazing. This is the most amazing thing I've ever seen on screen. I can't believe anyone had the guts to do this, but they did it. And I just loved it. I'm serious. I was cackling at the end of the movie.
I am going to meet you halfway on this, okay? Because I have said this, and I think I don't think I mentioned it I haven't been on any other podcast where I could have mentioned it, but I have mentioned this in conversations with other people, is that Darabont did a strictly anti-Western ending. And I mentioned this in a previous episode with Chris that I eventually cut out because I didn't think it had a place in it. But there is a whole storytelling tradition from the East that involves taking your heroes and making them into the centers of like a morality play. And I love to bring up this movie as an example. I'm a big Donnie Yen fan. Donnie Yen is a martial art actor from, I believe, Hong Kong. And he is in a lot of cop movies and stuff like that. He's a total badass. But anyway, he was in this movie, and I think I'll have to look this up, and I'll probably just have to put it out there. But it was basically, he's a cop, and he's kind of a dirty cop. And through the course of the movie, he becomes a better cop, and he's dealing with the mob, right? And so he faces off with the big bad mob boss at the end in this big fight scene that's in this high-rise building. And he beats the mob boss down enough, but the mob boss gets the drop on him at the last second and kicks him out the window of the high-rise. The hero is falling several stories, and he lands on the car that had the mob boss's wife and their infant daughter waiting in it for mob boss daddy to come out and join them. He kills them both when he lands on the car. The car basically implodes. So the hero of the movie dies and kills the mob boss's family, which is the thing that makes the mob boss regret everything he ever did. And this is a common trope in a lot of Asian action movies and possibly other, where your hero will die or something horrible will happen to your hero, but it will be in the service of teaching a lesson. Whereas in the West, we're like, the hero must live. Joseph Campbell reigns supreme. The dude goes on his quest and he comes back. And Darabont was like, fuck that. I am not doing that. I'm going to make the hero suffer in the service of a moral. And I don't care. I was so pissed off by that ending. But at the same time, like you, Brett, I was like, damn, respect, because I can't believe the studio let him get away with that. For one thing, I didn't think that would happen. Like, I think they had enough respect for Darabont and his previous successes that they were like, okay, we'll give you final cut on this. But I was just like, that is the meanest thing ever. Like, he kills his child. He murders his son with a gun. And then not 2 freaking seconds later, he gets out of the truck and the army's there and it's all over.
Yeah, the timing was a little weird.
How? Okay, I'm glad you could have made
It's
that
very
concession.
Hollywood timing.
You could have had like a scene that made it seem like it was a much longer time pass between when he did it and when he didn't do it. You could have done that. But that's like a quibble. I mean, and you know, the truck's rolling by with a woman who also is in The Walking Dead with her kids, and she's like, I went out to save my kids, and guess what? It worked out for me, and you didn't work out for you. You wouldn't come with me. Ha-ha, and now you're being punished. I don't know. I loved it. I loved it. I just thought, I can't believe they're doing this. This is amazing. Obviously, you can't end a movie the way they ended the book. I mean, you had to do something different because you just had to. You had to have an ending.
It needed to have a cap on it.
And it's kind of like, you know, Dawn of the Dead, the remake, where
Zack, what's his face?
Zack Snyder is his best movie before he went crazy.
I was just about to say that.
You know, which I love that movie. That's another movie I've seen 1,000 times. And I will be excommunicated for saying this. I like it better than the original. I just love it. I love it so much.
You were fine.
Okay.
You can
Thank
say.
you.
I agree with you. Yeah.
And that movie has an ending, and then it has the real ending, right? So it has the ending, and I've actually shown it to people, and the ending, and it cuts to black, and I stop it, and I'm like, do you want it to stop now? Or do you want to see the real ending? And if you watch through the credits, you see the real ending where everything goes wrong. And I don't know. I just loved it. I just loved it.
Did you read The Dark Tower at all?
I have
Brett?
never read a Dark Tower book.
Oh God. Okay, so I'm not gonna say that, but there is a coda, and King even tells you, if you like this, do not pass this moment. Naturally, who the hell doesn't read on?
Right, of course.
But yeah, so I love that. I love that setup, but oh God, I feel like I love that compromise, that if they had had that ending where he killed the son and the girl and he goes on from there, that he encountered, give it another beat or something. You think, Chris? Like, because we were talking about beats, right?
That ending is not what bothered me. And you said I was weird for why I had an issue with it. And I think I have words for it now after this discussion. So allow me, if you will.
Okay.
And we're going to go back to Lovecraft. This is the quote. The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear. And the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown. And this takes me back to Brett and your idea of the jiggling door handle, something knocking on the door. In order for this ending to work, you have to take out all of the guesswork and all of the mystery of this story. You have to blow the door wide open. This was a military project. So much so that the military guy's like, we went too far. We punched a hole into another dimension. And it was just like, there was too much telegraphing. And even at the end, after he kills the kid, it's not so much that we have to sit there with his guttural screams. He has to say, they're dead. For what? Like, we're so stupid. We don't understand the awful tragedy that just befell this poor man who's been through all of this terrible stuff. So to me, it was twofold. It was you tear away all of the Lovecraft stuff I so thoroughly enjoyed about this story. You take away all the mystery because you have to have the military come through and the mist clear. And everything's just nicely resolved. And in addition to that, you have a little bit too much like talking about breaking the fourth wall. It's like, no, everyone, what just happened here? See, what happened is he shot his son. The irony is, here's the irony. The military's right there. It's like, and so maybe it was just a little, the schlockiness of it is what kind of bothered me.
Can I propose a new ending that will make us all happy? I think we can make us all happy right here.
I'm not unhappy.
Well, I'm not either. I'm like, I am very happy right now. But no, so I will fully accept the killing of the son and the girlfriend and the going on. Okay, because I feel like that had an emotional truth to it that I could latch onto. That part of it did not, of course it was awful. It was tragic. But what if he just drove on and he was driving and he was driving and then he just exits the mist and it's just open, beautiful, pastoral, sun-drenched countryside, and he's just sitting there staring at this beautiful vista of rolling hills and flowers, and it is the most horrifying thing he's ever seen in his life because of what he did. Whereas in the other one, we have the military rolling in and it's like, ha ha, asshole, you shot your son, which is what it felt like to me, because I think that's what I felt like. I was being punked. I think that's like that ending with the soldiers rolling in and the mist clearing. Right. I was like, no, like that was the moment. So maybe we have the ending. Maybe it was just how it
The
happened.
Execution is part of it, but also like you took away all of the unknown stuff. You took away all of the questions. There are no more questions at the end of this movie.
That's the thing. You can keep your mystery of what happened, but you can still have that personal element of like, in this moment of desperation when I thought we were really done. Oh, wait, no, I could see Brett. I think I know what you're thinking. I have it wrong. I have something wrong. Okay, so...
Well, mind reading there.
Okay, we're going to workshop this thing until it works. So, he had to get out of the car so that an animal would kill him or a creature.
And he hears the rumbling and thinks it's a monster. Yep.
But it's not.
Yep.
But it's not.
It's the most wonderful thing he could have seen in any other circumstance, much like your rolling green hills. The cavalry has arrived, but it's too late.
Oh, Oh, God. Well, when you put it that way, the cavalry did arrive.
And he'd ran out of gas, so he couldn't keep driving.
Shit. I just want to make this work
look,
so bad.
The reason it doesn't work, he runs out of. It's like he runs out of gas, and he's gonna be like, "Oh, we're out of gas. Time to kill everybody." Right? Like
Right.
It's a little awkward. It's a little clunky. I get that, but my point is the overarching idea is great, even if the execution's not perfect.
Sure.
The overarching idea is good, and like I said, I think you get what you're saying. Ordinarily, seeing the military arriving in this massive convoy, destroying everything that's been killing you, would be amazing, beautiful, wonderful. This is great. That's the last thing he wants to see. Because when he sees that, the true horror dawns on him that he has killed his kid.
We might have maybe eliminated some of the ham-fisted dialogue. Okay, I'll give that up. And we keep the rest. All right, do we have an accord? Because I think that's really the thing. I have carried with me since 2007 a visceral grudge about the ending of this movie. And I've had people try to talk me out of it. I'm not saying you're talking me out of it. Or trying to talk me out of it. I don't feel that way here. But I've had other people say like, oh, it's just about how you shouldn't give up. And I'm just like, you know what? In that situation, I think a lot of us might have. Like, if you were faced with what you thought was an impossible situation, maybe you do. Like, you're out of everything. You're at the end of the road. You've run out of gas, literally and figuratively, and you have your most vulnerable person that you do not want to see be ripped apart by a cosmic horror creature.
And who you promised you would not let the monsters get him.
Yeah, and they absolutely did not. But my God, and I guess our discussion is really clarifying why Stephen King himself enthusiastically endorsed this ending for the movie. You know, I don't always agree with King on some of these things, especially when it comes to screen adaptations of his work. Kubrick's The Shining is one of my favorite films of all time as well. So I have a right to tell King that, no, sorry, your personal story about your alcoholism and your bad fatherhood situation, notwithstanding, Kubrick's movie is a masterpiece and you're an ungrateful bastard for not accepting that. But I get it. I really do. Because it was King's personal story. And I guess apparently Kubrick made his life a living hell while he was making
Sounds
the
like
film,
he made everyone's life a living hell.
As he does.
Yeah. Right? My God.
Poor Shelley Duvall, right? I guess at the end of the day, it's an ending.
It is the closest you're ever going to get to a cosmic horror. Everything falls apart. Your heroic deeds don't actually mean you get a good ending you're ever going to have in a Hollywood movie. It is so perfectly the universe doesn't care about you ending. I don't know. And I love it for all those reasons.
I certainly understand why, Brett, you love it so much, because you're right. It's basically like, I'm going to do an ending that is against Hollywood tropes, which I'm always for. Like, I don't like tropey movies, but I felt like, unfortunately, it leaned into too many other tropes. And that's where it just didn't quite work for me. But I don't need to like the movie because the novella's so freaking good. I'll just go read it again and enjoy that story. And there's something for everybody. And we don't have to like everything. But you know what? We don't also have to ruin everyone else's good time if they like something you don't. Go frickin' enjoy it. I love that you love it, Brett. That's what I'm trying to get at.
It's kind of like when someone sees a ghost, they're like, I believe that you believe.
I enjoy The Walking Dead. Allison does not like it. And I get it, but it's
I love the first season.
I like the first season
a lot. Yeah, it just kind of went off the rails.
I actually like the second season. I think I'm the only person who liked the second season.
Okay, I like that one too, because that was where it ended with where they opened the barn.
Which was such an amazing scene. Oh, God. Kind of like the end of The Mist, where you've built up this whole thing. You're trying to save the girl, and you open the barn doors, and what do you see?
More zombies.
All I have to say for any of my Walking Dead fellow watchers, I have a line for you. Look at the flowers, Lizzie. Look at the flowers. That scene, if you want to talk about just a gut-wrenching scene,
That
It's like
I
season
know
3
that
or
scene.
4,
I know
but
the
it's
scene.
so
It's an
freaking
amazing
good.
scene.
So freaking good.
Well, the thing is, I don't need to watch all of it because my friends watch it and they just talk about it and I absorb it. It's like with Game of Thrones. I, watch the first season and then I just let other people tell me what happened because I don't have
There's
time.
too much out there.
Way too much competition for what little attention span I have. So I just let people spoil it for me. I know exactly how it ends, man.
I mean, honestly, until they got to Alexandria, I thought it was great. Once they get there, then it kind of bogs
I'll
down.
say this much. I want to bring it back to the Mist. It doesn't happen enough. So whenever anyone brings Lovecraft to the small screen or the big screen, I appreciate it. Even if the execution isn't exactly what I like, I am dying for a show and a series would really do it. And I started really enjoying Lovecraft Country and I got maybe a way into it. And then it went in this weird direction where I was like, I don't quite like where this is going. I like what it was at the beginning. And it's mapping real world horror, racism in the South in an awful time in our history with this unfathomable madness. And there's just something really juicy. It's like Jordan Peele, who's like, I'm going to talk about racism through a social thriller movie called Get Out.
Yes.
And it had that vibe to it. But then it just went in this odd direction. I was like, what are y'all doing? And I kind of stopped watching it. But I want more of that.
I did hear it went off the rails.
It's very unfortunate. I mean, it's great acting. It's shot beautifully, but yeah, it just goes. It's just like, what on earth is happening here? But
in an offhanded way, another really good, possibly sort of cosmic horror-y show that's very rooted in real life is the first season of True Detective.
100%.
True.
The King in Yellow, the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yes, very much so. I want to see a little more of that. I love something about that concept, that cosmic horror concept that's tied to a real life setting and scenario. And I think you really can get that in the South, just because there is so much about the landscape, the history. When I've traveled and visited my family in like southern Georgia and seeing the kudzu covering everything. I mean, it inspires a lot of my work. And I always just felt like watching that. I felt like it just tapped into something like yawning
That's
open.
probably why we all like horror movies, because they're also another way you get to some unknown creature, force, entity that's out there. Like it's somewhat in that same vein, right? Like, where did this thing come from? Why is it here? Why is it after us? That to me is very fascinating. I think that's why horror works so well, like just the genre in general.
And I love what you said, Brett, earlier about like the universe doesn't care.
Mm-hmm.
The uncaring cosmos looking down on your suffering and it's just like, whatever. There is something distinctly horrifying about that.
Yeah, and I think, honestly, there's so much there to be tapped, and it hasn't actually been tapped into. I hope, like you mentioned the first season of True Detective, and I was hoping that the subsequent seasons of True Detective would sort of reach that same level, but
no,
they didn't quite do that.
3 comes kind of close, but doesn't quite.
See, I haven't seen 3. Is it worth watching?
Yes. Mahershala Ali, I think, is worth watching in any context almost. But yeah, he's really, really good in it. And I think it does come the closest to matching that feeling of kind of like helplessness in the face of some truly evil shit happening. And then you have him playing like an older version of himself. He's losing his memory. He's trying to reclaim what happened during this investigation as a guy who's got dementia setting in. You don't have a Matthew McConaughey kind of spouting off time is a flat circle kind of stuff, Like, I don't think you're ever going to get that ever again, which is kind of the unfortunate thing. But at the same time, it is memorable in its own regard. And the mystery itself is very interesting. If you didn't like the second season, kind of just like cast it aside and give the third season a go. I think it's definitely worth your time if you liked season 1. One other thing I want to say, like the ending of King's novella, King takes a lot of shit for his endings. I am ready to go to bat for King's endings. I love ambiguous endings. I love leaving people in the lurch. And I don't know if that's like my inner sadist coming out to twist the knife and making people suffer, like my book Strings. It just coasts to a stop. And that was very intentional. And I don't give a shit if anybody doesn't like it. Because for me, I want you thinking about this character at the very end, kind of at this like moment of crossroads. Tom Hanks at the end of Castaway, literally standing at the crossroads after coming back from this harrowing adventure, wondering if he's going to go after the lady with the angel wings on the back of her truck or if he's going to go the other way and kind of strike out on his own. People hated that ending too, but for me, I'm like, that is perfect because you get to go around and chew on it for a while and really kind of wonder if everything that you learned about this character along the way will inform what you think happens. And that, if you can't come up with a satisfactory explanation, then that was a poorly written character. We don't need to have our hands held and delivered to this explanation if we know enough about this character and their tendencies. What does Tom Hanks do at the end of Castaway? He goes after the woman in the truck. Of course he does. Of course he does, because those angel wings saved his life on that island. They were on that FedEx box. He opened that FedEx box. Everything about that, it stuck with him. He's going to follow that truck. We don't need to see him go after her. Some people, I guess they feel they need to see it. And for me, I defend a lot of King's ambiguous endings for that reason. If they were well enough written, if the characters are well enough defined along the way, you do not need to be guided like a child to the ultimate conclusion.
Well, I think a lot of the criticisms of King are based on movies made based on King books. And I think that's the difference, right? Like, is anybody really criticizing his writing? I don't know that they are. And if they are, they're just wrong. 'Cause I agree with you 100%. I think his endings are great. It's only when the attempt to take his books and turn them into movies where people are like, oh, I don't like that, right? And I don't necessarily think, look, I think the fact that it's really hard to make a King book into a movie is a testament to the quality of his books because they're not simple and they're not, I mean, movies are hard. You got to make an hour and a half. In an hour and a half, you have to tell an entire story, wrap everything up, have a nice ending that ends everything. And it's hard to do that. And I think it's a testament to King's books, not a knock on them, that it's really hard to make his books into movies. And look, it doesn't help him that, I mean, people are making movies out of Stephen King short stories like The Mangler, right? I mean, it's a short story about a press.
Oh, a laundry
folding
machine.
machine.
Yeah.
Exactly. We're going to make a movie out of that? I mean...
A Night Shift,
really?
Again.
Yeah.
Get Night Shift.
And the short story, way better, right? Then you watch it on the screen and it's like, this is really weird. But
No, like that concept makes no sense. Extracted from your brain and put on celluloid. It doesn't translate. His works do adapt kind of poorly, especially whenever they do delve into a lot of supernatural elements. His best adaptations are more, I feel, on the humanistic level, which is why Shawshank is such a good movie. It has nothing to do with anything supernatural. It's about a wrongfully convicted guy who breaks out of prison eventually. And, you know, The Body, you know, or Stand By Me, which we'll talk about later on this season. Same thing. It is all about just a bunch of kids going to find a dead body in the woods. It's not, there's nothing supernatural happening there. So I think when you're adapting King, like he adapts best, I think when the story is as humanistic as possible. And I think he's very humanistic even in his supernatural works, but it's just doesn't always translate for folks the same way.
or like Pet Cemetery, it's supernatural, but the heart of it is the human aspects. I mean, that's why the movie is so good. It's because that's the book as well.
You're talking the original film, yes. Okay, good. What's his name? The guy who plays Judd. He was in The Munsters.
Fred Gwynn.
Thank you very much. There will never be another Judd Crandall. I love John Lithgow. I mean, we sang his praises in the Twilight Zone episode back in season 1. He is the most fearless actor out there, and he was in, I think he played Judd in the most recent adaptation. It just didn't quite hit. They changed the whole aspect of that story because it was about a child, like a 2-year-old dying. And I think they even aged the kid up a little bit. Pet Sematary will be covered more in depth, but I will just say it is just, I think in its own sense, deals with like a form of cosmic horror that is grief.
Yes.
Grief of parents losing a very young child and everything that spawns from that, and the choices that you made of like, if you can bring a kid back from the dead, but you summon a horror unto itself, do you still do it? And he answers that question very deftly. And I stand by the ending of that story as well. And I won't spoil that ending, but I stand by it.
So I read that book before I was married, before I had kids. I mean, number one, I love the ending of the book. The last like 20 pages of that book are just incredible. And are so Lovecraftian and just everything about it's amazing. I remember my dad would not watch the movie. He was like, I can't do this. And I haven't done it since I become a dad. And I just wonder, I mean, the horror in that, I mean, to me, I really like The Shining. It's the first book I ever read by Stephen King. I think Pet Sematary is his most horrifying book.
Yes.
Particularly if you have kids. I mean, and you totally can understand everything that's happening in that book.
I am going to tease a little bit of we're having a mini Pet Sematary discussion. I'm sorry, Chris, because I don't think you've read this one. I don't know if you've seen it.
It's been a while since I've seen the movie.
Okay, so as I mentioned, I read the book when I was like maybe 13. And again, like, yeah, it didn't hit the same way because I wasn't a parent yet. But I will say what got me at that young age of reading that book, the horror of knowing that somebody as young as the age of 2 can be killed in such a horrifying way. Like as a young person reading it. And that also ties into my feelings on The Shining, because I also read that at about the same age. I was like on a King streak, like one after the other at that time period. So I read The Shining about the same time. And at that point, I was like Team Danny all the way. That's the one I latched onto, the kid. When I came back to The Shining as a parent, and same with Pet Sematary, it absolutely hits different. And I understood Jack Torrance in The Shining in a way that I didn't understand as a kid. And as a kid, I was like, he's strictly villain. He's a temperamental, mean guy. When I read it as a parent, and when I read it as someone who went through a lot of struggles too, I really identified with the dad. And it's the same in Pet Sematary. You come to it as a parent, and yeah, or even just as an adult, when you have lived long enough to lose people that mean something to you. So even if you don't have kids, if you've lived through a terrifying death or traumatic death of some sort, it definitely hits in the gut. And yeah, so it is really, if you're looking for Lovecraft, that intersection of Lovecraft, Stephen King, and probably the most gut-wrenching story you'll ever read, Pet Sematary.
Right. And it feels so real, right? I mean, there's nothing about it. In the beginning, you have this little supernatural thing. I guess the guy who's on the bike gets hit. But even that, you're like, that could just be sort of a projection of his mind because he's under so much stress or whatever. But no, I agree with you 100%. The one thing I'll say about The Shining, I completely understand King's problem with the movie. And in my mind, they're just two different things. Like, I don't even think of them as the same thing. I love the movie. The movie is completely separate. Then there's a book called The Shining, which is completely separate. And the book, Jack Torrance in the book, is so much more complex and interesting a character than in the movie.
This is almost like a science experiment, because some people say, oh, well, screenwriters shortchange the book and they just want to do what they want to do, and they make this whole thing. And like what Kubrick did, he made this viscerally atmospheric horror movie that's kind of like weirdly psychedelic, and, well, maybe psychedelic isn't quite the right word, but it's kind of trippy, right? Mm-hmm. With the score and just the stuff you see. It doesn't delve much into Jack's struggles. You know, you don't get that internal monologue. You don't get any of the stuff he's dealing with or the family is dealing with. So people are like, well, if Kubrick had just done that, it would have worked. Well, what happened? 30 years later, Stephen King himself comes out to write a screen adaptation of The Shining to be released as a miniseries starring Steven Weber as Jack Torrance. I can't remember who played the other characters because who gives a shit? It doesn't matter. It was terrible. He did his own screen adaptation of his own book, and it didn't work. It was not good. So, what conclusions can we draw here? Doing a direct adaptation of fiction to screen is not a surefire bet. Ever. It's not enough. I feel like it really shows that you have two very different mediums here. Kubrick understood that you're dealing with a largely visual medium. You have to create visual sensations and create a whole different psychology than King, who's writes amazing books that delve into the deepest thoughts of his characters. It just doesn't translate to the screen. It just doesn't. I don't know how you make it. It's like you can't make a bird live in the water with the fish. It doesn't work. So you have to create some awkward penguin. And that's what a lot of King's movies feel like. They just feel like gawky, weird penguins just there. And occasionally one works, one leaves the ground, but it more or less, they don't.
No, I mean, look, I think if King were a worse writer, his movies would be better. I mean, that's just what I think. I think it takes someone who can take the book, take the essence out of the book, and create their own art, like you're saying, to create a good Stephen King movie. If they are trying to remain completely loyal to the book, it's not going to work. And I think you see that again and again and again, but it's because it's like Tolkien, right? And Lord of the Rings. People who love Lord of the Rings and are crazy about it will tell you the movies aren't any good because they don't have Tom Bombadil in them or whatever, right? And it's like, no, the movies are amazing for their own reason. So are the books, but the movies are their own thing. And I feel like you have to do that with King, or it's not going to work.
Yeah. I think you have to really, if you want to appreciate King, honestly, it does behoove one to read the source works and come into the movies with diminished expectations. There have been some good adaptations. I would like to say that the Misery adaptation that we covered previously, pretty good. I give that one like an A- to B+. I have quibbles about it, but to me they're kind of petty, but I'm not going to dwell on that too much. And I did on the episode. If you listened, it's there. I think we have to be comfortable with the fact that some writers, like you said, if the writing's really good, you're getting very much into the character's head and you're telegraphing a lot of what the character's thinking and feeling. And that just doesn't always translate very well to the screen. And that is not taking away from movies as a powerful medium or whatever. They very much are. But if we're looking at adapted works, I think that we have to talk about that and just say, yeah, I would say The Mist as an adaptation, we are all very much have different opinions on this in terms of like grades that we would give it. But it's not the worst one. I'll say that. It's not the worst adaptation of a King book ever. I'm trying to think of one that is. I don't know. I'll have to meditate on that a little bit.
I'm going to go with The Mangler.
Okay, all right. Fair enough.
I want to say, and those of you out there who are curious about this whole cosmic horror thing, obviously H.P. Lovecraft, you should read that. If you want something a little different, Carl Edward Wagner was a author who wrote some great horror. We talked about kudzu earlier. He wrote the best horror story about kudzu called Where the Summer Ends, which is fantastic. He also wrote a short story called Styx, which if you've ever seen the Blair Witch Project, when you read Styx, you'll understand where they got the idea from for that. And then one of my favorite authors is a person named Manly Wade Wellman, who wrote all these cosmic horror stories set in the Appalachians. It's amazing, so go check that out.
That sounds great.
I have several stories I am adding to my list now. Chris and I are like avowed Blair Witch like fanatics.
You gotta read Styx then. Carl Edward Wagner, Styx.
I love that. Thank you very much for recommending those. And Thank you so much for coming onto the show to talk about Stephen King and not about true crime, which you do on your show to brilliant effect on the Prosecutors. And I miss Alice. I want Alice here, but I know she probably doesn't read Stephen King.
She does not.
I get the sense. I get the sense that Alice is just, she might not ever want to be on my show. And
I'm sure she would love to be on your show. It's just, this is where Alice and I part ways. When it comes to horror, she is not a fan.
If you have not listened to The Prosecutors, please do. It is, like I said, Chris and I have talked about this show a lot on here, but it is, I would say, for both of us, a weekly go-to.
And it's not all grisly murders. Some of them are just these really profound mysteries. And I think those are the stories I really enjoy. And you guys cover some great ones. And if you don't know about Dyatlov Pass and the Dyatlov 9, that is the 5-part, I believe, episode. I'm going to tell you, Brett, I've listened to those episodes probably like 6 or 7 times. I'm not kidding. Like, I am so engrossed with the whole tale. Like, I just want to keep listening to it. And so
I turned people on to your show just strictly by Dyatlov, and they've stuck with it. I didn't know about that story until I encountered it on your show. And then Chris and I both encountered it at the same time, and we both freaked out. And I've spent so much time on the Reddit, the Dyatlov Reddit.
It's almost like when you read a book series and a new book comes out, so you reread all the other books before you read the new one. I kept doing that, like, okay, I gotta listen to part 1 and part 2 because part 3 just came out. Okay, now I gotta, I just kept doing that the whole way through.
Oh, I was doing that too. It's like me with Better Call Saul.
Oh, yeah.
Like Better Call Saul's, the latest season's out, so I'm about to rewatch the whole series. And then we were like, what if we start watching Breaking Bad all over again for the 6th time, and then go all the way through Saul just to get to the last season. So that's what we have done with Dyatlov. So please, if nothing else, check out that one, but you're going to stick around for the rest because Brett and Alice are just
a delight.
Magic.
A delight.
Like, your voice, Brett, in particular, because you have like a kind of like the more boomier voice compared on the show. But anyway, like, your voice is projected through my house as I'm getting ready for work every day. Cause I go and I turn it on my phone when I'm getting ready for work, and I have it like jacked up, like full volume in my bathroom while I'm getting ready for work. Cause I don't want to put my earbuds in. It's not like the whole house gets to hear the Prosecutors, and you're better off for it. Wow. As far as I'm concerned. So everybody would be. So please go check them out. And Brett, anything else you want to tell us about what's going on in your life, what you're doing, where else people can find you, or you just listen to my podcast?
I mean, you can listen to the podcast. I don't know when this episode's coming out. I'm looking forward to seeing you guys at CrimeCon in a week or so.
Yes.
Meeting in person. That's going to be amazing. I can't wait to do that.
So much fun.
Brett, to evoke a discussion we've had about the dead internet theory, I think we have officially vanquished that, because we have proven that we are real, at least via audio and video.
The 3 of us.
So far.
Sure.
Yes.
The rest of the internet may be dead, but we're alive.
Oh my God. I love it. Again, thank you so much for coming here. And in addition to checking out Brett and Alice on the Prosecutors, please check out Chris and his buddy Ben on 80s High for primo 80s nostalgia content. You guys just do such good research, and you make it such good fun. I learned so much listening to your show, Chris, just about the cultural aspects of everything that you dive into.
And if you want to talk about horrors from the great beyond that crash onto Earth and wreak havoc, we're talking about Alf in our next episode. So
that's absolutely perfect. I can't say enough about how happy I am that this intersection of the 3 of us has happened, because I said I wouldn't have known Brett if it wasn't for Chris, and this podcast wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the both of you. The Prosecutors inspired me so much when I was listening to it in the beginning, and it made me feel like I want to do this for real. And Chris being there, supplying the ideas, the support, and all that. I hate to get mushy right now, but damn it, I'm just so happy we're here, and I hope we get to do it again. In the meantime, please go on to Apple, give us a review, and visit me on Twitter, dddarknesstime. You can also email me at dddarknesstime@gmail.com. And what am I forgetting? I know I'm probably forgetting other things, but is it really important if you don't remember it
No.
in the moment?
They have a reading list. They have a lot of things to watch. We've given them so much.
They do. Just go read some Stephen King. Okay, guys, thank you so much for coming.
All right. See y'all.
I still don't have an outro for this show, and I never will.
I like the catch you later, you little ding dongs. I like that.
You have the little canned message. It's fine. Like, you don't need anything before that.
Ding Dong Darkness Time has been brought to you and produced by yours truly, Allison Dickson. It was made possible by an array of amazing co-hosts, friends, family, but especially you, the listeners. Big shouts also go out to the brilliant Nathaniel Dickson for the show art and future legend Spencer Morlock for all the music. I'll be back again soon with another episode. In the meantime, be good, you little ding dongs.